Hare Krishna, everyone. Welcome to Bhagavad Gita class, I believe 16, and broadcasting here from Hawaii. We're using a different Zoom link today. We're gonna have to pause the recording halfway through and then re-invite everybody on a new link. But we're gonna make it work, and it's great to see all of you. And we're just waiting for people to log in. So I'll start with a little kirtan. Om Jnana-timirandhasya Jnananjana-shalakaya Chakshurmilitam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha. Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Shri Vasadi Gaura Bhakta Vrinda. Hare Krishna 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 Hare Hare, Hare Rama 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 Hare Hare. Hare Krishna Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare Krishna Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Nitya Gaura Hari Bol, Hari Bol, Hari Bol, Nitya Gaura Hari Bol, Nitya Gaura Hari Bol, Hari Bol. Hari Bol, Nitya Gaura Hari Bol, Jaya Jaya Prabhupada, 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 Jaya Prabhupada, Jaya Prabhupada, Jaya Prabhupada, Prabhupada, Jaya Prabhupada. Hare Krishna. Om Jnana Timirantasya Jnananjana Shalakaya Chakshuramiritang Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha. I was born in the darkness of ignorance, and my spiritual master opened my eyes with the torchlight of knowledge. I offer my respectful obeisances unto him. Hare Krishna. All right. Technical difficulties aside, we're here. Jai. I'm going to get up and get a little water so I can speak and stay hydrated. I'll be back in 4 seconds or less. Haribol. All right, great to be with all of you. Yeah, just a reminder, please bear with us. We're going to have to divide the recording into two. About 35 minutes from now, it's going to log us off, and I will send another link. I'll start another meeting. I'll send another link in the chat. So it's kind of awkward, but you know, we'll make it work. And both will be recorded and both will be posted. So let's start with a little reflection. It's been a couple weeks. Noel's going to have your camera off. That's okay, no problem. If we think about it, like just the fact that I'm in the middle of the Pacific Ocean and you're all, on the east coast of another whole other continent, and we're able to talk about Bhagavad Gita. I mean, these little small contingencies, this is insignificant. We're actually just really fortunate to be able to connect like this, and we'll take it. I know I've missed having this Sangha. Didn't happen last week because of insurmountable technical problems and time, 5-hour time difference, and etc. But let's get a little reflection to get us back on track. We have looked at the first part of the 13th chapter of Bhagavad Gita. And I'll just get us started. The chapter is called Nature, the Enjoyer, and Consciousness. And it begins with Arjuna's questions about the field and the knower of the field. This is some terminology that the Bhagavad Gita uses. And we had a discussion about the knower of the field is the world, anything that's observable through the material senses. And even the senses themselves, they're all matter. They're all part of the field of activities. And the knower of the field is the conscious living entity that's constitutionally different, categorically different. So I'm living in this body. The body is the field. My memories and the observable world is also part of the field. But the me that's doing all the observing, that's actually like behind the camera, seeing things, that's actually the knower of the field. And Krishna says that to know the knower of the field and the difference and relationship is real knowledge. And then he also said that I'm the knower in all fields. And I know a number of us really appreciate at this point that, yeah, Krishna is actually our connection point. That's how we can connect to others. That's how there is understanding, and that's our common reference point. Is that I'm living with my reference point, one little knower with one vantage point on the field, and there's a dozen other people here live and a few others in the recording, and they all have their own vantage point on the same field, right? It's a shared reality. But the knower in all fields is Krishna. He's present as the Paramatma, the super soul in everyone's heart. He's by his mercy, there is a common field that we're all inhabiting in this planet and time, and he's occupying that space in the heart, in everyone's heart. And that's a point that resonated with a lot of other persons in the group, as well as myself. So let's get some reflections on anything else that stood out. There was also a nice discussion on knowledge, humility, and so forth. Let's get at least a couple reflections to get us into the flow of the 13th chapter. Anything that you've appreciated from your readings or the recordings, or that stands out to get us flowing. Let's get at least one. I know we can do that. Something that you heard or read. Otherwise, I can just, from my memory, some things.
I can share.
Absolutely. Go ahead.
I just, I know, I've been catching up, so I've got a lot of chapters in my head all at once, but I wrote down something I thought was really poignant last time we met, which was learn to be empty so you can fill up. It's simple, but so poignant.
Learn to be empty so you can fill up. Thank you. Yes. In the 8th to 12th verses, there's a series of verses that were translated together about the principles of knowledge. And it begins with Amanitvam Adampitvam Ahimsakshantir Arjavam. Amanitvam means humility. Yeah, if the cup is full, it's hard to have new knowledge enter. In fact, I was hearing from one friend here in Hawaii who studied. Some of you may know him, Benji. He's in our kirtans different times. He studied Lomi Lomi massage from the different Hawaiian teachers. It's a Hawaiian modality. And he said that his understanding is traditionally when you approach a teacher in the Hawaiian culture, you come with an empty cup as a gift. It's symbolic. It's like, here, this is me. I'm not full of a bunch of stuff. I'm actually empty. Like, I need you, and I've emptied out the other stuff. I'm receptive. So whatever good stuff you have to give, I'm coming humbly. And just like the water flows downward, if you put the cup up and you expect it to be filled, it's not going to happen. You got to come low, and you got to be empty, and it'll flow and fill you. So there's that principle. And that's the first thing that Krishna says. That's how knowledge flows. Thank you. A number of other things in those verses came out too, we might reflect on as well. Leanne.
Bible.
Hare Krishna.
Let's see. So something that I really liked was remain equipoised in both happiness and distress. And then it also said practice unbreakable devotional service. So I really like those two little points.
Yes. Equipoise in happiness and distress. And this has come up many times in the Bhagavad Gita. Yeah, and practice unbreakable devotional service. Also a principle of knowledge. And in fact, our acharyas, our teachers, those who have taught by example and followed the Bhagavad Gita over the, centuries, since millennia of its being shared in the modern era, they've said that that's the most important principle of knowledge of that list, verses 8 through 12, that if you don't have the other things, if you're not humble, if you're not clean, we talked about cleanliness, if you're not ahimsa, if you have violent tendencies, it's violence gets in the way of receiving knowledge. All these things can be lacking, but if you have devotion, you're connected to the Supreme in devotion, that's actually going to help you develop the other things. Because by virtue of your connection and devotion, you will be purified. You'll develop humility. You'll become cleaner. You'll become peaceful. You'll become uninterested in negative, degrading association. You'll become attached to spiritual teachers and the other things that are listed there. So those all come one after the other. And Prabhupada goes out of his way to point out that, therefore, we can see that devotion is not dependent on knowledge. Rather, knowledge is dependent on devotion. When it comes to the Supreme, this isn't like going to school and getting a degree. when it comes to spiritual knowledge, actually the most important thing is to have it be rooted in bhakti, and the foundation of devotion, service. And that way, whatever we need is flowing downward from the supremely knowledgeable, rather than trying to figure out and grab it out of the air for ourselves, which is the kind of modern empirical academic thing of like, oh, it's all out there to get, just grab it as hard as you can and make it yours. And that depends on your strength and your intelligence, and it's not like that. It's good to have intelligence, it's good to study, it's good to be clean, it's good to be nonviolent. But if you don't have those things, practice devotion and you will become qualified for more and more spiritual knowledge, because it's about receiving help from the Supreme. Thank you. And Aaron.
I wondered if you could, and you might have done this in a class a while back, but speak a little bit more about what being equipoised means. Because sometimes when I see something like, remain equipoised in happiness and distress, I wonder, does that mean, tempering my feelings so I don't swing one way or the other? Or I'm just curious what your perspective is on that.
Right. Well, Bhagavad Gita in the second chapter talks about this, that Krishna says, you have a right to perform your activities, but you don't have a right to expect a certain result or to enjoy it, have it be yours. Because we have our natures, we have certain activities and duties that are natural and appropriate for us. Just like, a common dharma or duty or service or activity for many people in this Bhagavad Gita class is to be a parent, right? And there's a number of activities and duties that go along with that. And yet, like any successful parent will tell you, and if you talk to like the older generation, one of the main things is like, they'll teach you like, yeah, you got to do what you're supposed to do, but at the same time, your kids they're their own thing. They're each independent living entities, and you can't expect an exact result. Like maybe they'll be grateful to you for what you're doing. Maybe someday they won't. Maybe sometimes they'll be like this. Maybe sometimes they'll be like that. And so equipoise is like, I do what I'm expected to do and what's under my control. I stay within my circle of influence. But I don't like let myself get dissipated all over my circle of concern, way beyond my circle of influence. Like, what if this, what if that? Like, they should ideally this, but there's so many things about the reality that aren't going to be ideal, that are always, and that's not ours to control. So equipoise to some extent means not trying to control that which isn't ours to control. We don't have the responsibility to control the outcome. We have a responsibility to do our best around that, and the rest is in God's hands. The rest is in the hands of other people who have agency as well. And so like Arjuna was very concerned about the outcome of the war, so much so that he was thinking like, okay, if it goes this way and we win, that's so bad because of this. And if it goes this way and we lose, that's also really bad because of that. But he was basically just thinking like from the foundation of, well, how can I enjoy? What's good for me? And so Krishna's like, well, hold on. Like step away from that, because that's the position where you're not equipoised anymore. That's the position where you can be in Hawaii, you can be in the most beautiful place in the world, but if you're thinking like, I've got to have this, I can't lose this, then you're just in anxiety. It doesn't matter what you have at that point, you're not equipoised, because you're always like, what if it's taken away? How can I get more of it, right? You see this with people who maybe are like extremely wealthy, but they have the most anxiety about losing their wealth. So equipoise is actually like, it manifests that way of not trying to over endeavor, not trying to control that which is not ours. And the root of it, according to Bhagavad Gita, the easiest way to get it is to be situated in understanding that we're part and parcel of the Supreme. Because when we're remembering Krishna, we're Krishna conscious, then we're conscious of our relationship with that Supreme, and then we see, okay, that's who I actually am. That's what's not changing from moment to moment. My bank account balance, that'll change. My surroundings, the weather, that'll change. I'm not always going to be in Hawaii. Not always going to be in Vermont in the winter. All those things, other things are coming and going. But what hasn't changed in my life is my connection with the Supreme. That's always been available and is always actually vital. And so that's the root of being equipoised. But it manifests in the ways that I talked about. Much can be said of it, and I would recommend, honestly, not to kind of like cop it out, but there's a lot of stuff in the Bhagavad Gita, and you can reread with an eye just to that point, and you can see a lot of instructions on subtleties of how to like kind of flesh out that point of what does it mean to be equipoised. A lot in that 12th chapter we just read, a lot in the second chapter. for example. So good question. All right. Any other reflections before we move into the rest of the 13th chapter? My aim is to finish the 13th chapter today. I think we can do it. All right, great. Let's go into it. Chapter 13. We read verses 8 through 12, the principles of knowledge. After that, Krishna says, having described the field of activities and the knower of the field of matter and spirit, and the principles of knowledge, now he's going to talk about the knowable, Brahman. It says in text 13, I shall now explain the knowable, knowing which you will taste the eternal. Brahman, the spirit, beginningless and subordinate to me, lies beyond the cause and effect of this world. So he's going to talk about spiritual reality, that which is beyond materially observable reality. So because of that, this next section reads like the Upanishads. It reads like there's a lot of apparent contradiction. It's very abstract. So don't be concerned if this section like seems like really kind of heady and abstract. It is. And that's okay. But I'll try to summarize and have it be, something you can have a takeaway from. But he says in verse 14, for example, Sarvatah panipadam tat sarvatok shishiro mukham sarvatah shrutimaloke sarvamavritya tishtati. Everywhere are his hands and legs, his eyes, faces, and heads, and he has ears everywhere. In this way, the supersoul exists, pervading everything. Remember, the supersoul was described earlier in the chapter as that part of the supreme that resides in the heart of all living entities. That's our common center. That's how Krishna says that he is the knower in all fields. Like, I know my memory and my body, and I can see this room, with my senses, and you all have a vision of the room you're in, and you have your little vantage point on your past and future and your ideas. But I can't know those things, and you can't know mine perfectly. But there is a supreme entity that knows all of those. So that super soul, that witness. So like we hear about conscience, when your conscience speaks to you, that little voice of wisdom, that little voice of the divine in the heart, that's super soul. That's the Paramatma. And Krishna is describing that here. Everywhere are his hands and legs. Text 15. And let's share a little Sanskrit because it's always very beautiful and purifying. I'll share the screen with you all. This is 13:15. Sarvendriya gunabhasam sarvendriya vivarjitam asaktam sarvapruchaiva nirgunam gunabhoktricha. The supersoul is the original source of all senses, yet he is without senses. He is unattached, although he is the maintainer of all living beings. He transcends the modes of nature, and at the same time, he is the master of all the modes of material nature. So in this way, there's a series of apparent contradictions that he doesn't have senses. The idea is that the Supreme doesn't have material senses. The Supreme doesn't have a material body. So by the process of negation, sometimes spiritual literature will describe that in this way, the Supreme in this way, so that we understand that it's not like what we see here. The Supreme doesn't have a body of flesh and blood like we do. Doesn't have a body that has a beginning and end. And yet, as Srila Prabhupada points out, many of the scriptures and spiritual texts also talk about how the Lord hears our prayers. The Lord receives our offerings. He sees with his spiritual eyes. So there is these verses presenting contradictions to help us come to a higher level of consciousness, that to not think of the Lord or the Supreme in material terms, that he has senses, but they're not material senses. Doesn't have to put on glasses because his eyes don't see 20/20 anymore. It's not like that. It's not about flesh and matter. 16, the supreme truth exists outside and inside of all living beings, the moving and the non-moving. Because he is subtle, he is beyond the power of the material senses to see or know. Although far, far away, he is also near to all. Verse 18 also confirms, he is situated in everyone's heart. Hridi sarvasya vishtitam. He is seated in everyone's heart. So after that, it moves into the next part of the chapter. Starting from text 20, Krishna starts talking about the relationship between us as living entities and the material world. So he says here in verse 20, material nature, the field, and the living entities, the knowers of the field, should be understood to be beginningless. Their transformations and the modes of matter are products of material nature. Verse 21, nature is said to be the cause of all material causes and effects, whereas the living entity is the cause of the various sufferings and enjoyments in this world. So the idea is that we're in this, as long as we're in this world, we're in it, and we're subjected to material nature. Like we have our summer and winter seasons. You know, I'm here in Hawaii, and pretty soon I'm going to be in Vermont. And that's a function of the body I'm in being situated in, you know, North America in the 21st century, and that's just the material world. And so those transformations, he's saying, those transformations of time, of season, of my body aging, of whatever, all these things are happening due to the modes of nature. Nature is causing that. I'm not causing my body to age. I'm not causing the seasons to age. And they're operating from guidance from the Supreme Person, but they're operating as energy. Material nature is the material energy is going on with its cycles and rhythms. But he says notably here, the living entity is the cause of the various sufferings and enjoyments in this world. Actually, the snowstorms and beach weather, those aren't the cause of our happiness and distress. That's up to us. That's actually up to us. We can't control what happens, in other words. We can control how we experience what happens, which is just classic spiritual wisdom, that you're not going to be able to try to control the world. So don't really try. Don't really try to control these things that are beyond you. Don't try to, you know, micromanage your weather experience, because you're not the cause of that. You can adjust it. You know, you can seed the clouds and make it rain. You can wear a jacket when it's cold. But really, the force of your experience is a more internal thing. It's something that doesn't come from matter. It comes from you as a soul. You can choose what your experience will be. And then in verse 22, 23, a couple of very important points are brought up, so I'll read them in Sanskrit. Verse 22. Purushav prakritisto hi pongte prakritijan gunan karanam guna sangosya sadasadyon janmasu. The living entity in material nature thus follows the ways of life, enjoying the three modes of nature. This is due to his association with that material nature. Thus he meets with good and evil among various species. The idea is that because of our previous activities, our previous association with one kind of mode of nature or another, we follow some path, we have some trajectory, right? Just like in this life, I had a predilection to reading books. That's not a coincidence. It's not a genetic fluke. That's not caused by chance. It's some cultivation of activity from my previous lives, from some previous trajectory. And I liked playing with Lego, and there's some other things I didn't like. And so there's like, you know, there's some different trajectories I have, and we all have. And so Krishna is saying, in this way, the living entity is enjoying the positives and negatives due to their cultivation of associating with one modality or another, and mixtures of these modalities, life after life. Does that make sense? That this is the relationship between the field and the knower of the field. We're floating through. And as we bump up against different things, we associate with that, and we develop a connection with that. And that connection comes back, we develop that more. We start to become, you know, more of like an action person, more of a thinking person, or someone develops like violent tendencies, they can cultivate that, or someone develops peaceful tendencies. So we can cultivate through our own endeavor and through association our direction. And we have actually been doing that, mostly unconsciously. But that's actually what living entities are always doing, especially in the human form of life. We have more scope to do that. Harder for, you know, cockroaches to get a personality. They're kind of like following their like, it's very hackneyed. Cockroaches are kind of all the same, no offense to them, but it's like, it's a little bit more restricted. Human beings can be different. They can have varieties of personality. They can have different interests. They can branch out. So Krishna is talking to us, especially as humans, and saying, you know, we've been cultivating different modalities and going in this way by associating with the different modalities, different kinds of energies of the material nature. And in verse 23, the next verse, he says this. Oops. Let me share this. 1323. Upadrashthanamantacha purta bhokta maheshvaraha paramatmeti chapyukto dehismin purushah paraha. Yet in this body there is another, a transcendental enjoyer, who is the Lord, the supreme proprietor, who exists as the overseer and permitter, and who is known as the Supersoul. So once again reiterating that. And yet, as we're passing along in the world, life after life, all of us apparently independent, there is the supreme knower who is permitting and overseeing. That's the Supersoul that's allowing us. The Supersoul is actually sanctioning. Anumanta means the permitter or sanctioner. The Supersoul is that function of the divine that sanctions our activities. Like, there's a part of us that's like, oh, I really want to do that. I want to go in that direction. And we kind of like move our energy that way, and where attention goes, energy flows. The Supersoul sanctions that, allows it to happen, and actually sanctions that which we would consider good or that which we would consider bad. Like I can cultivate criminal tendencies, right? We know that's possible, because we know that people can cultivate, selfish tendencies, or we can reform ourselves and become more selfless and caring. We can do these things. And in either case, there is a permitter. There is somebody, the Supreme, that's sanctioning that to happen. Oh, you want to go in that direction? Okay, here is some different association. Here is some inspiration. Here are some different higher or lower modes of nature for you to come in touch with. And allows that to happen. Just like when we wake up after a nap, there's that moment you don't even know who you are. They're like, oh yeah, that's right. I have to go get ready for the Bhagavad Gita class. I'm giving class on chapter 13. Got to figure out this technology. I'm in Hawaii. All that stuff comes to you. Where does that come from? It comes from the permitter. It comes from that sanctioner. It's like, I wanted that, and that memory is jogged. That direction is given. That trajectory is continued again. So Krishna is raising his hand and saying, yeah, I'm doing that. I'm functioning in that way. So let's pause here. Actually, I think I'll try to go on a little bit. We have 5 minutes before we're going to get unceremoniously booted off, and then I'll have to rejoin. And maybe at that point, what I'll do is I'll try to talk for another 5 minutes, get another Zoom link, invite you all back, and then we'll take, with that natural break, we'll take reflections and comments. So maybe I can get through the chapter here. So that's 23. Continuing, Krishna says in 24, one who understands his philosophy concerning material nature, the living entity, and the interaction of the modes of nature is sure to attain liberation. And he says that, they will not take birth here again regardless of their present position. Then he talks about different ways of knowing the Supersoul, different ways of approaching that Supreme in our heart. Some perceive the Supersoul within themselves through meditation, others through the cultivation of knowledge, and still others through working without fruitive desires. Then in 26 he says something very relevant for us. Anyetvevam ajananta shrutvanyepya upasate tepi chatitirantyeva mrityung shruti parayanaha. He says, and yet there are still others who, although they're not conversant in spiritual knowledge, begin to worship the Supreme Person upon hearing about him from others. Because of their tendency to hear from authorities, they also transcend the path of birth and death. So he's talking about the power of meditation, of selfless activity, of cultivation of knowledge as ways of gradually realizing the Supersoul, presence of God in our heart. And then he gives us a shortcut that even if you don't have those things, if you're inclined to hearing, you're hearing submissively, just like you heard about humility and pridelessness, that's how knowledge comes down. If you show up to class and you're like, I don't know anything, teach me, then even if you didn't have any the other qualifications, then you become qualified in whatever the teacher is sharing. So Prabhupada talks about this in the purport here, that in this age, this is especially important. In modern society, he says there's practically no education in spiritual matters. Some people may appear to be atheistic or agnostic or philosophical, but actually there is no knowledge of philosophy. This hearing process is very important. Lord Chaitanya gave great stress to hearing because if the common person simply hears from authoritative sources, they can make progress, especially if one hears the transcendental vibration Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. And this purport to 26, I'll leave it for you to check out later if you'd like to, elaborates on this, that this hearing process is very much a shortcut. That the analogy Srila Prabhupada gave is like if you have a tree with beautiful, wonderful fruits at the top and they're ripe and delicious, you have one person climb a ladder up the tree, or they climb the tree, they get the fruit. What do? If they just drop the fruit, it's ruined, right? They have to pass it down. One teacher passes it down to one student, they become a teacher, passes it down to the next student, and in this way the knowledge is passed all the way down to you at the bottom of the tree. You've never climbed a tree in your life, but you want that fruit of knowledge, you want that fruit of connection, and you receive it from your teacher, who received it from theirs. There's an unbroken chain. No matter how high that tree is, there's enough teachers in the branches, like little monkeys, they're passing it down to you, you get it, you get to taste it. And that's the process of submissively receiving, asking appropriate questions as Arjuna does, and basically doing what you all are doing here in Bhagavad Gita class. We're not practicing intense meditation, selfless activity, or the cultivation of dry knowledge. We're actually practicing devotion in the hearing process from authorized sources. So this is our process. And I would say the rest of the chapter deals with more of the same, about the nature of the supersoul, how Krishna says they're present in living entities, just like they pervade the body, just like the sunshine pervades all the universe. And if you see with the eyes of knowledge the difference between the body and oneself, and then the Supreme, then you can become liberated. So at this point, I will log off and get a new Zoom link and invite you all back, and we'll take comments, questions, and reflections. Hare Krishna. See you in a few seconds.